Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on skincare claims. I'm Brian Ecclefield, and I'm the founder and managing director of Validated Claim Support in Teaneck, New Jersey. VCS is an FDA-registered clinical research lab, and for the last almost 15 years, I've been involved with developing clinical studies for skincare, hair care, some medical devices, and nutraceutical or nutritional supplement-based products as well. In 2019, I branched out on my own and founded a team and put together what's now Validated Claim Support, one of the US's fastest growing clinical research organizations that mainly specializes in vivo research to help back up and support claims on labels and in marketing materials. We're going to start today with a bit of a refresher on what guidances look like at the regulatory level and what differentiates cosmetics, drugs, soaps, and other products from one another. So there's a really funny guidance from the FDA. I mean, the title's funny. The actual guidance itself is not funny in any way. So the name of the guidance is it a cosmetic, a drug, or both, or is it a soap? And the reason I think that that's funny is because the FDA guidances are all over the place, and there's always so much confusion with regards to, I'm sorry, hold on one second. That was bound to happen. I've got it out of the way now. So there's so many confusing and conflicting recommendations and guidances. In the end, intended use is actually the most relevant and important phrase of the day here as we talk about claims. So oftentimes firms will violate the laws and best practices by making a claim as if a drug is a cosmetic or as if a cosmetic is a drug. So you can actually kind of cross the line both ways. So the intended use of a product is something you have to consider, not just on your product labels, but also in any language that you distribute that goes consumer facing. So that could be messaging in a commercial, messaging in a magazine, or a print ad. So all of this goes back to the FD&C Act, which is where cosmetics are defined. We're not going to go too deep into regulatory today, but long and the short of it is that cosmetics are defined as articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, sprayed on, introduced to, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, altering the appearance of an individual. Among the products included clearly here and actually listed in this guidance are skin moisturizers, perfumes, lipsticks, fingernail polishes, eye and facial makeup preparations, cleansing shampoos, permanent waves, hair colors, deodorants, and any substance intended for use as a component of a cosmetic product. That is a very wordy, inclusive list, and it also includes a lot of things that can be considered drugs or soaps. So herein lies some of the difficulties in navigating the world of claims. On the other side of the fence, the drugs. So drugs are defined by the FD&C Act as articles intended for the use in diagnosing, curing, mitigating treatment, or the prevention of a disease, as well as any articles other than food intended to affect the structure or function of the body of a man or animals. So with that said, there's a couple pointers on how things can be drugs and cosmetics, because there's constantly a bridge between something which is intended to improve an underlying condition, like wrinkles, that then discusses some type of scientific mechanism, such as promoting collagen production, as a quick example. So there's many products that meet the definitions of both cosmetics and drugs. Collagen production is a funny example because it's not an inherent drug claim, but it is in a bodily function. It's a systemic change at the cellular level. Another good example, shampoos are generally labeled as cosmetics because their intended use is to cleanse the hair, which we talked about on the previous slide. That said, an anti-dandruff shampoo immediately gets qualified as a drug because dandruff is an OTC claim inherently. So a dandruff shampoo or an anti-dandruff shampoo is both a cosmetic and a drug. Intended use is really the core takeaway again. So I'll say that phrase a couple of times. So intended use refers to the claims that are stated on the product labeling, in advertising, on the internet, or in any other promotional materials. Certain claims will automatically qualify products as drugs, regardless of whether the drug has any drug-related ingredients or components. So if you're marketing a product as a cosmetic and you say the word dandruff anywhere on the label, you say the word acne or SPF, you have immediately put yourself in the FDA's crosshairs. So even though those products, you may have an all-natural product, but you're saying those words and you've now crossed over the line into the drug realm. In terms of how the intended use falls into claims and efficacy, the funny thing is that you can prove that your product removes dandruff, but you may not be able to state that because you don't have an active ingredient. So intended use is sort of half of the scenario. The other elements are the actual inclusionary ingredients. And I'm going to come back around to drug ingredients and how you can use them to further support claims or change the positioning of your products. In terms of personal care and beauty and skincare testing, you have a huge realm of different facets which come into play. So products go through a lot of different stages of testing. Since we're talking about claims that face final consumers, we're really mainly focused here on the in vivo elements of testing, and that means on human participants. So we're going to talk about a number of different in vivo areas. There are some claims which are made at the in vitro level, but the best practice recommendation is that any final formulation for intended use on human consumers is tested at the in vivo level. So in vivo and ex vivo. Ex vivo being any type of either excision or extraction. You could collect human hairs, you could collect skin samples, and then you can test on those in a controlled laboratory environment. The main components of these two types of research are what we would call safety testing, which still is majorly used in the claims world, consumer perception and focus groups, which is getting some sort of subjective feedback from individual users about products, reactions, and feelings more than anything else. And then there's clinical efficacy, which is everything else. In terms of the safety side, there are some really cheap and easy claims that you can run, or tests that you can run, and you can pull some claims out of. So from a safety perspective, the most commonly used methodology for proving that a product is not irritating is called the HRIPT, or the Human Repeat Insult Patch Test, or RIPT testing as it's often called. Depending on the product categories, you can have occlusive, semi-occlusive, or open patch conditions. This is what that sort of looks like on the back here. You've got 4 different sets of 10 products or chambers, and you're hoping that after multiple applications that there's no redness, dryness, or erythemal response. So that will help prove that your product doesn't cause irritation. In the long term, you then go back and you test each product on a naive site. So you're doing multiple applications on the same sites for a handful of weeks, usually 4 weeks. You take a break, and then you add another untreated site with the same products and make sure there's no reaction. This test is really, for the most part, the widest used safety test for topical products. Now, it's important to note that this is a skin test on the back. There's no hair on the treatment sites, so this does not necessarily prove that something like a shampoo or a conditioner is safe. For those cases, you would really want to go with an in-use test on the relative treatment sites. That said, HRIPT can still be done on diluted shampoo, which is going to keep the shampoo in contact with human skin longer than it would normally be. So it's sort of exaggerated use, which means even if somebody doesn't fully rinse the product out, they're still going to be safe and there's not going to be a reaction. There's a lot of recommendations you'll get for safety here. The most common claims from the repeat insult patch testing are listed right here, and different labs will tell you different things. I'll tell you that HRIPT has and is used to make all of these tests with different modifications or claims. So you got hypoallergenic, dermatologist tested, not a primary irritant, non-sensitizing, non-irritating, and safe for sensitive skin. Down here, you have the nightmare situation where an individual has what I would consider to be way too many products on their back, and they have a ton of very severe erythemal reactions. Usually best practice in industry is not to test more than 30 or 40 products at a time, as you could see here in the top image. So why do claims need to be supported? One is to help you boost sales. Product differentiation is key. There's a huge push for scientific-driven skincare, scientific-backed skincare. Consumers will look out for certain language. So a lot of people will go out and look for things that say non-comedogenic or hypoallergenic or dermatologist tested. On top of that, there's a huge push on the regulatory side. So products must be safe for human use, and the responsibility or the burden of that falls on the brands and the manufacturers. The language is pretty loose, so even FDA will tell you that you require sufficient data to support claims. How you're supposed to find out what that is to go out on your own, do a whole pile of research, ask multiple labs and consultants, and see what your competitors are doing. The other big reason for supporting claims is the civil side of suits as opposed to the legal side. So there's a lot of consumer class action suits going on right now. There's a lot of competitive lawsuits, and there's a lot of secondary direct challenges within the industry. There's also awareness groups within the personal care space who are looking out and sort of policing how people are using claims. So we just talked about sufficient data. What constitutes a valid claim? In some cases, with SPF and OTC elements or dandruff, there will be best practice recommendations or monographs from FDA that have to be met. Usually, we're talking about industry standards. The competitive landscape for claims is tighter than it's ever been. You have a really high potential to go direct to consumer and hit a huge market in a hurry. Consumer comfort's another one, so depending on how you're skewing your language, you can sort of fall into a more drug or quasi-drug space by how you're positioning things like medical or clinical, even just imaging and subtle secondary words around your brand. So the best practice is to obtain reasonable and sufficient scientific data to back up a claim. I know that that's a loose phrase, and I'm happy to take questions directly about it at the end of the presentation and to help out in any way that I can as you all start to navigate the claims world. So on the OTC side, this is where skincare kind of hybridizes into the drug realm. I'm going to use two simple real-world examples. So we're going to look at acne as our start here, and then we're going to look at sunscreen. So drugs are dictated by two aspects. One is the inclusion of a proven or an OTC ingredient. Here you've got a salicylic acid acne treatment. The inclusion of salicylic acid, along with some type of efficacy that demonstrates that there are less acne lesions or a reduction in redness or inflammation, those two things will allow you to state the word acne on your label. They've also would have had to go back and have done some specific blackhead or comedone studies here, improves the look of pores. So there's clinical research behind these claims. In order to say the word acne at all, you have to hit that two-part test. In order to say acne, pimple, lesion, or whitehead, you must have an OTC ingredient and support reasonable efficacy. Here we go back to sunscreen, which we looked at earlier. So sunscreen is also dictated by two distinct aspects. So, oops, my language is about acne still. Let me go one. I'm going to come back to sunscreen in a second since I can't go back now. Okay, so the four pillars of in vivo efficacy. These are going to be the main ways that people look to support their claims at the clinical level. So you've got subjective user perception. This is not technically a clinical study, but it's still very widely used. It's accepted by HSN and QVC. There's no reason you cannot use subjective perception to substantiate a wide range of skin and hair care claims. You can use roughly 20 to 25 questions per time point. You can hit a wide swath of different components between anti-aging, moisturization, fine lines, wrinkles, pores, you name it. The important distinction here is that you're only allowed to report numerically on the number of people who agree on something. So in a study on women aged 30 to 65, 79% of women agree that their skin felt more smooth. You cannot make an explicit objective claim and say something like skin was 79% smoother, because that's not what you're measuring here. These studies are usually pretty cost effective, and they can be done through clinical research institutions, or they can be done at consumer perception, sometimes even just at home use case institutions as well, where the products get mailed out. Next, you have expert clinical grading. This is really where you start to get into the objective clinical world. So this is where you get to distinguish between statistically significant results, and you get to state that your product is clinically tested. You have professional on-site or continuous at-home applications. You can have one application, or you can test the product out to 2 months or 6 months, depending on what its use case is. You generally have controlled temperature and humidity on site with standardization for applications. And then there's a trained expert grader who's evaluating these different conditions of the skin or the hair. That person can be a technician, any type of doctor, most often dermatologist, an esthetician, a cosmetologist, a clinical research coordinator. Sometimes people are looking to make claims about who runs their studies. So they want to say dermatologist tested or dermatologist approved. But there's no negative in having a trained clinical skin technician grader in comparison to a dermatologist. Dermatologist doing the evaluations also doesn't necessarily make your claim any stronger, with the exception of the fact you can claim dermatologist tested. You can usually ask anywhere from 5 to 7 parameters on a study like this. We do get requests pretty often for people looking to try and do everything under the sun in one study. And when you start combining acne and anti-aging, you really start to muddy the waters, because now you're talking about people with wrinkles and people who experience consistent breakouts and pimples. The ages are skewed, the conditions are not the same. If you have different conditions, you should really run 2 different studies. Following the grading, you've got biophysical instrumentation. Now, this is sort of a laser focus. You have percentage-based improvements, and this is where you get something along the lines of hydrates by up to 143% in as little as 1 use. So this is really those like scream it from the rooftops percentage-based changes. Anything about skin's barrier at the in vivo level is generally done via instrumentation, transepidermal water loss. These types of studies totally require clinical visits, like the expert grading. They cannot be done at home because you need a controlled environment and a trained technician. Those four things really come together to make a good clinical claims package overall. It's really important to note that there are intrinsic and implied claims throughout the whole process too. So it's really not just what you say on your label, it's what you say to the consumer or in your messaging in any way, shape, or form. We came back around to sunscreen, and now the sunscreen one has my acne language. So on the sunscreen side, so this was the acne. Okay, so coming back for closeout here, I wanted to talk about how to build a good clinical relationship. So studies are dictated by a number of different factors, as we talked about. There's regulatory, there's best practices, there's a competitive landscape. What you need to do in order to effectively navigate the claims world is focus on the relationship. So talk to multiple labs, talk to as many people as you can on the regulatory and legal side, talk to your marketing team, let the marketing team also speak to your clinical labs, because the language shouldn't be dictated by them. It should be dictated by how well a product actually works. And oftentimes that's not the case. In terms of tangibles, as you're evaluating clinical labs, you can look at the timeline, pricing, turnaround time, and quality of work. Those are things that you'll be able to see clearly laid out for you. Less tangible factors are going to be customer service, labs telling you, no, that's not achievable through the type of facility that we operate. And then expertise, knowing that not every product is the same, and you have to create a custom clinical study for each product that you sell. You really cannot consistently find a lab that does faster, better, and cheaper every single time. I say that you will find those labs if you Google clinical fraud in the claims or personal care space. They are out there. So you need to pick one or two of those different facets. If you're going for all three, somebody is going to take your money and they may support your claims, but you're in a very risky place, because if it seems like it's too good to be true in this space, it is too good to be true. Do your due diligence. Search on the FDA current drug establishment site and make sure that the lab you're testing at is active, that there are no 483s or adverse findings. Search on Google. Find the name of the owner of the company. Search on Google for fraud. Go on Glassdoor. Look at the lab. Look at how the employees react. You usually can find the message pretty clearly if you do a little bit of due diligence. And your clinical lab is one of the most important partners you're going to have, because those consumer-facing claims are very heavily scrutinized. MOCRA is mainly looking at safety. Once we get through that, efficacy is the next thing to have a major sweeping overhaul from FDA's eyes, as far as I'm concerned. With that said, if you have any questions or comments, now I'm going to open up, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to run this little seminar, and thank you all very much.